Okay, we'll move on to confirmation of the non-confidential minutes. Moved by Councillor Burdett, seconded by Councillor Sheldrake. Any matters arising? And then if there's nothing there, all those in favour? Councillor Seymour, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just note that in the minutes of the last meeting, 10.4 on page 10, and we were to have a report on the roof of the museum, and I see in matters of in the work plan that it's now further 6 weeks away.
Yes.
Can we be sure that we do get it, because it sounds, this year at the next meeting? Can you follow that up, because it obviously is quite an important issue for the museum and for the tonga that in that museum.
Yeah, thanks for that. I had a note to move that onto the action sheet because it is a paper for November. So I think we'll put it on, make sure it's on the action sheet so it doesn't.
It is on the action sheet, but I'm just asking that you see that it happens.
Not the action sheet, the work plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. Councillor Brown.
Oh, kia ora. Just point on page 7.6.1 that large communication boards and tairawhiti presentation. I just wondered, do we have traction in that space, or is it something that's up to this community sector to get funding and to move it forward? I just was interested to know that was a great presentation. So just regarding the wiki o te reo Māori, as well as anything to do with communication, I think it's great. Where's that at?
So I have an answer for that. So I touched base with Ms. Pinto during lockdown. They have already communicated with our staff at the Botanical Garden. So that is all happening because they have the funding secured. They just need guidance from staff, what's allowed, where it can go. So our staff has been very proactive, and I know Michelle and her team has touched base with Mrs. Pinto already.
Thank you.
It's Seymour again.
Well, just one, I think it's a typo, but it's at the top of page, and it's probably what the computer picked up. The fourth bullet point on page 10, and it talks about major roadblocks to the Uber hub, and I think we might have been talking about a sports hub. Can that just be corrected in the minutes? Fourth bullet point on the top of page 10.
Sorry. I think I have heard it referred to as the Uber hub. It's the sports hub. So, yeah. Fancy name for bigger. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else with matters? No? Councillor Foster. Oh, second. Okay. Move Councillor Stoltz, second Councillor Foster. Nothing further. Oh, we have. We've done that. We're just going matters arising this.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, in terms of page 12, 10.8, 1, the fourth, the far right footpath budget was already over allocated. What does that mean in terms of the do up of our townships?
So through the chair, the far rates for footpaths are allocated every year on the network that we have footpaths across the district. So it has been fully allocated. So what we're alluding to there is that we don't have funding assisted rates for footpaths for township upgrades. To do that, we would have to drop something else off the renewals for footpaths across the district. There's more need to do the footpaths than we have available for funding.
Supplementary to that, Mr. Chairman, and it's a bit early in the day to get cracking. We have done footpaths in the city and the other townships. What you are saying to me, unless there's adjustment in terms of the monies, resources been allocated to those northern townships, that footpaths, if they're in the plan, will be taken out of what the allocation is. Is that right?
So through the chair, to clarify, when it comes to the footpaths for the community upgrades, for the township upgrades, that's part of the prioritisation of the funding that's there. So if the community wants the footpaths done, it's whether or not we have any funding available to top it up with the far rate or not. If not, it has to come from the allocated budget that they have. We always check to see if we have any funds available to be spent in those townships when they come up for renewal. The funding assisted footpath work that we do is to deal with the footpaths that we have across the whole district where we have to do replacement repairs. It's not for new footpaths that we put into that far rate unless they're specifically identified in the RLTP.
Thanks for that vote. Councillor Brown.
Just on that conversation, thank you, Mr. Wilson. Do we, I mean, I have a resident who is in a mobility scooter and has messaged me a number of times. She had a fall the other day, and I just wondered, but the request for service, like if she rings into council with regard to that footpath incident, do we take the number of requests for services for footpaths to give that a push forward as a fix, etc. I just trying to give you good information, if you like, as to when things will be done. I know I've brought this up previously around footpaths, but how does that mechanism work if there has been an incident, say, of an accident where she's stumbled? How can I help support her with her footpath inquiry issue?
So through the chair, it needs to be lodged as an RFS so that we can then get the team to go out and have a look at it and see if there is a fix that needs to be made, and then we prioritise them with the fixes that have to happen across the network.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. In respect to the traffic calming measures, my question is that, well, we often move an issue with respect to the speedy people who were using that won't be able to. Do we monitor where the next hotspot becomes an issue for those that still choose to speed down urban streets? Do we keep an eye on that? I mean, is it a police matter?
So through the chair, speed on the network is a police matter. We have a good relationship with the police, and there are a number of sites where they are having increased issues that they're talking to us about what measures, if any, we're able to do to make sure it's not the roads that's causing issues. But if it's coming down to speed, it's a police matter for them. If there's safety improvements we can make, then we bring those back through the RTC.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Against? The governance work plan on page 17, just want to add in the museum roof into November. Anything yet? Oh, no, you got a matter from the action sheet? Yep.
Sorry, I just had, Isaac's on Zoom, isn't he? I just had a question around item 14.1 on the action sheet. There's a narrative there in around the pest management, regional pest management and PMA areas. And the narrative sort of leads me to believe that the report is not coming, that instead we're just waiting for a TRMP review on PMAs. Just wanted some clarity around that, whether we are still expecting a report and workshop.
Who's gonna-
Through you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? It's Michelle here. Yep. Okay, so this was...
Okay, try that.
Can you hear me okay? Cool, okay. So this was intended to be the update. As you'll see in our commentary, we have some work to do once the TRMP has been updated to reprioritise our PMAs and where we put our limited resources. So I wasn't anticipating a further report on the PMAs, but we can do if this doesn't provide you with sufficient information at this stage.
Yeah, look, I would just, I mean, obviously we don't want to, I don't want you to invest in an entire program of work. It's, I just note that our spatial plan had a whole bunch of mapping carried out. We have a reasonably good idea of vegetative cover, and if we apply the criteria, we must have some idea of what additional area over and above the existing 317 protected management areas there would be. And because it's such a significant issue for landowners, it seems problematic for me to wait until the TRMP review, purely because this is probably not going to be in the initial first tranche of either freshwater or housing. So it could be years away before we actually articulate to people just how this impacts them. Hence me raising it. Thank you.
Joe, you might want to add to this through the TRMP process as
Yeah,
well.
kia ora tātou. We do have a report coming to Sustainable Tarawhiti next month on the MPS, proposed MPS for Indigenous biodiversity, and also covering the proposed MPS for highly productive land.
Thanks for that, Joe. Nothing else on the action sheet? Thought I saw another hand. No? Okay, so moving on to the government's work plan, addition of the museum roof, nothing else there? Okay, thanks. We'll move into this first of our big options, items here. David's going to give us a presentation on this first, so that there might be some of the questions burning questions we've got maybe answered through the presentation. So we'll go through that first, please. Thanks, David.
So given how softly I speak, I might just take my mask off so you can hear me clearly, because I think I might be about to speak for a little while. So the report that we've given you is an update on where we are at with the maintenance contracts for the roading network, and to look at the, there's a couple of things that we need from the committee today. So the first is around the 17A review, and then the second bit is around the proposal that we're putting forward with 4 roading contracts going forward, but then also the procurement plan. So just where we are in the process, this is the procurement plan. So what we're seeking is an endorsement of how we go out to market for the roading contracts that we have in front of us. So as the committee is aware, we've been working on these contracts in the background, and we sought an extension to these contracts to 30 June of next year so that we could undertake this work, because we're fundamentally looking to change the way that we deliver the roading maintenance contracts for the district. So if I can talk through the presentation that I've got, and then I'm happy to take questions afterwards, just so that I can maybe cover off a few things that you're going to raise with me as we go through. So we've been working with consultants, and then also with the contractors in our region around what is the next step for us with our maintenance contracts. As the committee may have already been aware, we are proposing 4 maintenance contracts for the region, and there are a number of inputs that have gone into that, and they're in the reports that you have in front of you, and I'm conscious that you've got some large reports there that cover a lot of this off in detail. One of the main reasons for this is around economy of scale and looking at what is the right resource for the regions that we needed in. A lot of the market undertaking research that we did, and we've gone from 2 contracts to 1 contract, so now we're proposing 4. Actually, it's more than 4, you'll see in a second. So you'll be wondering why we want to go that way, and it's in the report, but just to paraphrase it, this is about economy of scale, particularly in the north. So the 4 areas are Hikurangi in the north, which goes from basically Te Puia around to Pōtaka. Then we're talking about Uawa, which goes from Te Puia down to Whangarā. Then we've proposed what we're calling the Tūranga ward, which is the city ward, which is your city urban area effectively, and then the Waipawa ward. For each of these, it's around economy of scale and the types of work that we need to be undertaking. So working with the contractors and looking at what is the physical works that actually happens on the ground, we need to develop up what an economy of scale looks like so that we can put it to market to get the right response there. We've had a number of tier 1 contractors, obviously, that are interested in these, and that's your Higgins, Fulton Hogan, Downer. We've talked to a lot of the big players as to what they want to do here. So they've all been in touch. But then we also have an emerging, what we call 2nd and 3rd tier contractor base here in Tairāwhiti as well. And that's where there's some of those contractors that do a lot of the maintenance work physically on the ground now, but they do it for a tier 1 company. So they're subcontracted to Downer effectively at the moment, or subcontracted to Fulton. So what we're looking to do is to break the region up into areas where we know there's an economy of scale for the right sized resource to go in there and manage those contracts effectively. When we talk about our maintenance contracts, predominantly for our rural areas, it's grading and drainage. That's the name of the game when they're there. So a lot of it's your metling, your grading, and your drainage cleanouts. That's what keeps the rural roads going. And we need resources that are able to respond in order for when we have weather like we do now. We need people who are in region, in place to be able to respond effectively. So for example, Hakurangi is the most obvious. We all know how far away it is to get from here to the coast, and moving resources from Gisborne all the way up to Ruatoria or Te Araroa or right into Waikura makes no sense. Having location-based resource up there that's able to respond quickly is really important in that area. It's not a big area, but it's quite geographically spread out. By the time you've all been up to Waikura, you know how far that is. Also going into any of those big valleys up in there, they go up for a long way. So you need something up in there. Same with Uawa, and then you have Waipawa, which is spread out. However, it's quite well connected and a lot of it is sealed. And I'll go into the breakdown of them in a minute. So with the 4 regions, a lot of the things that we've talked about is the challenges that we've had when it's come to delivery, and a lot of that's been around spreading resources too thin or not having the right resources in the right place. Budget constraints and what that means. And by budget constraints, we're talking about the cost of moving things around the district as well. Every time we move a grader from one area of the district to another, it costs thousands of dollars. So trying to have resources that we're not ping-ponging around the district makes it a whole lot cheaper and a lot more effective for us to be able to have things that stay on their roots in the way they do things. There's also a big opportunity with 4 regions to look at levels of service changes across the district, because you can start having the location-based resource. And I know it feels like I'm punctuating sentences with location-based resource, but a lot of that comes down to your efficiency and your productivity on the network. And that's how we're able to do more for less going forward, is by having more productive units on the network rather than moving them across vast areas all the time. The last bit there has been feedback from the market, and we've done a lot of market research, as you can tell from the report, as to where contracts are useful, where they're not, how it's hard. We've also looked across at other roading contracts across the country to see how they're managing things going forward, but then also what is size and scalability. And I'm not just talking within here in Tairāwhiti. So for example, when we talk about our sealing season, we're not competing with anybody here in Tairāwhiti. We're competing with Auckland, Wellington, Tauranga, Hawke's Bay, because those sealing crews move across the country. So if we only have a really small sealing contract, we're not that appetizing to everybody. We bundle it all up. We now have an economy of scale that we're in the same mix as Tauranga, Hawke's Bay, because of the size of our district and our spend for Waka Kotahi on the state highway and ourselves. We now have an economy of scale. Break it out into 2 or 3 contracts, it's not that interesting anymore. And we won't get the big crews that can come through and do it efficiently and do it well. So the other bit that I just want to talk to is the sealing there. So I know I've got a lot of words on here, but a lot of this is in your papers. So a lot of this is in there already. One of the things that we want to keep separate, so I've talked about your 4 maintenance contracts, which are just to maintain the network. The bits that we actually want to pull out are your sealing, so your pavement and your rehabs and reseals. We want to do the network-wide one, as I said, to get that economy of scale. It's the same thing with the vegetation. We've noticed that one contract to do the vegetation across the district will help us when it comes to flexibility of being able to do the right work where it's needed, rather than having it, well, that's in that contract, that's with that one, we can't break them. We can actually just do it across the whole contract. And it's the same for the sealing. And then the other one that makes sense to pull out is obviously the streetlight contract and have that region wide, because whoever does it is going to subcontract it. You're not going to get a streetlight contract to run a roading contract. They're just going to sub somebody in. So hence why we want to put those out as different contracts, so that we're not paying for somebody else to manage a contract that we can manage ourselves. Just want to touch back on that pavement, rehab and reseals. One of the things we want to do going forward is put that where the asset needs the investment, instead of where we have budget to spend it between the 2 contracts. And that's a really key thing for us going forward. By having region-wide reseals and rehabs, we can go out, look at where the investment is needed each year and target it across the whole network, not it's already been split by the geographical line of which contract has which work. This way we can target it where it's needed on the network. And that's really important for us as operational, so that we know exactly where it is that we're going to be spending the money and we can prioritize it ourselves. So when we look at that, the big thing around pulling the region out is how many contracts should we have? So we looked at, and what it's saying up there behind me is, we looked at having one. We don't like one. It's too hard for one contractor to have the scale to come across it all. We looked at going with even more contracts. However, as soon as we do that, the cost goes up for both parties. So we could have broken it down even further to pull out more things out of the maintenance contract, which you can do to make region wide. However, you start to lose it because we're going to have another person to manage that contract. They're going to have to admin. So we've tried to keep it at an economy of scale that works. In the document, you'll see from some of the market research, one of the ones that tier 1 companies have said to us about is, well, we don't have a base up in Hikurangi. We don't have an economy of scale for that contract unless we get both. That is deliberate. We're looking to see resource that can do it effectively going forward that's not based from one of the main centres. So we need it to be based up there. So that's something where our tier 2 and 3 contractors are interested in, because they've said we could actually go for a contract of that side to help build up our capability and our skill going forward as well. Doesn't mean we're trying to get rid of the tier 1s at all. We absolutely need the tier 1s to go for these contracts, but it's around how they deliver it on the ground is what we're going to really see as part of this. So to give a quick indication of the budgets, and again, this is in your report if you need to see this in detail, is around the breakdown of the spends for each of the districts as they go forward. So this here is for the maintenance contracts, and in the contracts that we have, there are separate spends for this. You know that we spend more money than this per year in roading. This doesn't include emergency works, and it doesn't include capital works with our spends that we have here. So there are bigger spends that happen all the time, particularly flood works in the north. What we're trying to do, and what we've done to inform these numbers, is we've gone back over historical spends to have a look in each of these areas. We've also kept everything in there for now, so you can see your resales and things there. But we've gone back through the RAM data. So rather than looking at the contracts, we're looking at the RAM data. And the RAM data for everyone is that's where asset condition. It tells us what condition our assets are in, how many need replacing, what are the spends, what have we actually done physical works by. So we've gone back through the last few years of data, and then we've looked and gone on our condition assessments, what should we be spending in these? So we haven't plucked these numbers out of anywhere. These are very well-informed numbers. What we're doing is, as these numbers come out, we're testing them with ourselves and testing with our advisors to say, do we think these are right going forward? Are they the sort of sustainable numbers given the budgets that we have to make these contracts tick and work? So these are what we would propose. And you can see by the scales that are there on the budgets that come through, they are, here we are. So we need to pull out the contracts that I've said that we're going to pull out as part of it. But this is also why when you look at the numbers for those breakdowns, things like Waipawa aren't as high as what you would think it would be given the size of the network. So this here is the proposed contracting budgets up here behind me. Is that you, Heather, or me? So for the Hikurangi budget, it's a couple of 250Ks worth of roading up in there, but it's about $1.8 million would be the maintenance contract. And that's based on the maintenance spend that we would do up there and the needs that we can see up there on that network at the moment. That doesn't include flood works and it doesn't include capital. And it carries down by there. The one that stands out is the Waipawa and the Uawa contracts. So just for clarification, for Uawa, that is our high heavy forestry route. We know that we get that network absolutely hammered. That's Tauwhare, Mata, Ohongia, all of those are in there. So they are very expensive roads. For that district to be able to maintain serviceability, we're recommending that we think there should be 2 graders in that one area at all times. 1 grader in the north up in Hikurangi, and then 2 out in Waipawa at the same time. Now, I know that looks strange because you look at Waipawa and say it's a far bigger network. Far more of Waipawa is sealed. So a lot of that comes down to actually Waipawa's roading networks a lot more sealing than what they have up in Uawa. So the budget for maintenance looks lower, but actually it gets the lion's share when it comes to the resales and rehabs every year. So that's what tops it back up to get the spend that it needs on that network. And it's just simply a different type of spend in that area. So with those maintenance contracts, you can see that we're trying to have an economy of scale that works for the size districts that are there, but then also make sure that those bigger spends across the whole district are able to be spread to where we need them to be as well. So One of the things that we wanted to talk about is in the market research that we have undertaken, we talked about making a stipulation. We're trying to manage no one having a monopoly is what we're trying to do here. So that's obvious. And we've said to the contractors, we don't want someone to have a monopoly in the region. So we don't want somebody to come in and win the lion's share of the work and have hardly anybody left them behind it. We need a healthy competitive market in region, not just for the maintenance, but for the capital works, the flood works. We just need the economy of scale. So what the original provision was, is we tried to keep it that you couldn't, we proposed that you couldn't win both the Uawa and the Waipawa maintenance contracts, couldn't go to any one contractor. A number of people have pushed back on that and said, well, that there is the lion's share, and actually then we'd just all be fighting over what was left, so they'd only go for one or the other. What we're proposing to do is to say nobody can win more than 3 contracts. And when I say 3, that includes the vegetation, that includes the reseals and the street lights. So you couldn't win anything else if you won those. If you won the Waipawa and the reseals, you could only win something else off that. You couldn't win any more than that. What we're trying to do is make sure we have a healthy market, and we want to signal to the market that we want that by splitting it out in that way as we go forward with it.
So how many contracts in total would there be? 6?
There's 4 maintenance contracts and then 3 other contracts. Reseals, streetlights and vegetation are the other 3.
So 7. What if the situation was though that one tenderer was so great on meeting the criteria that, you know, they were just a streets ahead of everybody and this would scupper them?
We would talk to them and come back to you to say it's at our discretion. We can choose, and it's in the procurement report that says if there is one tenderer that completely blows everybody out of the water and we're like, there's no point, we will come back and seek guidance and approval as to how we're going to hold them to account going forward.
Thank you.
Can I just
Yeah.
carry on?
Well,
Just let me get
finish
through,
the
okay?
report, please. Yeah.
So the last thing that I just want to talk about, and you'll see that I've tabled something today, and it's because we've had some further feedback of how we manage our criteria going forward and the evaluation criteria. So the evaluation criteria is really tricky, and it's a balancing act, as you can tell by the pretty pictures that Donna's done up. So one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that we don't have too many criteria, because too many criteria, they're all not worth each other. They just start to cancel each other out. One of the big ones that needs to be in there is price, because you can have the greatest thing in the world, but if I can't afford to run it, there's no point. And that's where price is important no matter what. We're accountable for that. So what we're trying to do is balance the reward between how we can have the price that we can afford, but then looking at how do we enable the price to still let us buy things like social outcomes that we're looking for, but then also how do we make sure we incorporate climate change and sustainability into the price that we are putting forward for our maintenance, because those things do come in as additions in a price that comes forward to us. So how do we balance that out? We've had a couple of options that we've been working through. So the first one that's in the paper at the moment had this balanced out, and we had the relevant experience sitting at 10%, which is obviously really important. We need to make sure the contractor who's here has done a contract of this type. I crassly say I don't want someone with training wheels running a maintenance contract. It's too hard on us and it's too hard on them, and we all know how that's gone in the past. The relevant skills is really important because that comes around to staff and operators. So relevant skills is who are the people, who are the soft ones that are actually in those roles that are there. Have they done this type of work? Do they know how to do programming? Do they know, what are their grader drivers like? Have they just grabbed them, or have they done 10,000 hours? What do they look like? Methodology is a huge component of what it is that we've got in here as well, because we need to make sure that how are they going to do it? And this comes to some of the questions that I know you're going to have around what do the grading schedules look like? What do the patrolmen look like? How do I know that they're going to answer the phone when an RFS comes through? They have to demonstrate that in their response, which is the stuff that's got to come up. Then we've got social outcomes, which are really important. And we're proposing something different with the social outcomes. So under the current maintenance contract, with the NOC contracts that are there, a certain percentage of the works has to be given to local subcontractors. And that's in the Waka Kotahi prescriptive way that it's done. However, what we've found is that doesn't give much certainty to the third tier contractors, because it's at the discretion of the tier one as to who they use. We don't have very much influence over that as council. What we're requesting through this process is that they tell us who their subcontractors are going to be, the work they're going to be doing, and the value of that work as part of their bid that comes through to us. What that will mean is that third-tier subcontractors will have certainty of work, and they'll also have certainty of continuity of work, which is the really big thing for them, that as the budgets go through, they know how much work they've got coming up. And a lot of the subcontractors will say, you don't control that part, Downer controls that part, or Fulton controls that part, we're just the subby. This way they can actually have that going forward. But it's also around for us with our procurement that you've directed as council around how do we enable our local economy? How do we enable our local suppliers to start stepping up in this area? And then I know that the industry is already having a number of discussions with each other about that. Sustainability is a really, and you'll know I'm a geek, is a really exciting part of what's coming up in our industry in roading. So this is the bit where some of the innovations that are coming forward around sustainability are really cool. However, they all come at a cost. But a lot of the tier one contractors are talking about artificial intelligence and being able to add that to existing vehicles that are driving around that can actually take condition assessments via AI as it's cruising around. That then takes down the carbon footprint because you're not sending out an extra 2-3 vehicles to do the stuff when the vehicle was driving past anyway. The driver might have been driving at normal speed to go somewhere else, but the AI is picking up the condition of the road signs along the way, or looking at whether or not there's enough white line on the road. So there's some really cool things that will come back through in sustainability. Also with the GPS technology that's there at the moment around how to cut emissions and then also show that they've cut emissions, and some of the reuse technology that's coming out as well with using materials, recycling materials, but then also how they can lower the volume of transport movements and those things. So that's going to be valued in our sustainability. The last one's the 30% for price, and that's quite important. That's a waka kotahi component. So that is something that we need to put, they have put in there. That's something we have to put past them. That's the option that's in your paper. What I've tabled today is to strengthen the social outcomes and the sustainability components of our contracts. So this is based on feedback around how do we do this better and how do we really challenge ourselves around how do we actually get our contractors to step up in this way. So the difference is the relevant experience is still at 10%, the skills are still at 15%. What we're proposing to do is to drop 5% out of the methodology and resources and put that into social outcomes and sustainability to give those more weightings in response to a number of the conversations around this table around how do we make those things meaningful within our contracts. And apologies to be tabling it, but it's something that we thought was important enough to bring to the table in this way. Part of that is around how we can make sure that we're pushing the sustainability and we're pushing those social outcomes. But as you can see, we've left price because all of those things come at a cost. As we joke about in the office, we can buy gold-plated Rolls Royce, but we won't be able to afford the petrol if we don't get the price right of it. So we have to be careful with how we balance this up. We think this is a fair way to balance it, and we think it's a way that the market will now have to respond meaningfully when it comes to social outcomes and it comes to environmental initiatives as part of these contracts too. But it'll really push the innovation, which is something we want to make sure we do as part of this. I'm happy to come back to the slide at the end of this if we need to, okay? So I just want to touch on a couple of FAQs. And so I know there's a lot of text up there. I'm happy to give this to you afterwards, but I just want to touch on a couple of questions that I know some of you have. So quality assurance is identified in the pavement rehab weightings, but it's not identified under some of the other contract weightings. And it's because when you do pavement rehabs, there's such a significant piece of investment that goes into that. And this can be hundreds of thousands of dollars of liability per sealing season that we have with a contractor who does it. So when we go through and do sealing, we need to make sure that we have got some assurance around the quality, because I don't want to put sealed in. Hey, I know, I'll put my hand up before somebody else reminds me of it. We know some seal failed from earlier on this year that got put down. That sits with the contractor to remedy. That's not on us. As soon as it gets clear sealing season, they have to go back and fix some faults. Annoys the heck out of me because I drove over the one on Oradua Road about 4 times a day. A number of councillors remind me about it as well, but we know that it'll get fixed when it comes around to sealing season this year. That sits with them. So we need those things in there. When it comes to something like vegetation control, I don't need the same, because if they don't cut it right, we send them straight back out to go back out and cut it. So we don't need to have those same sort of liabilities hanging over with them, because we can send them back out to remedy and fix it straight away. But for something like big rehabs, the fault might not show up for 6 weeks, 6 months, even a year, but we don't want to wear the cost of poor workmanship a year later, because it should last within it. So that's why you have that in the pavement rehabs and not in some of the other maintenance work, because the other maintenance work, you fail and they just have to go back out and do it. We just don't pay them for it. So the quality assurance processes, just to cover off that as well, the stuff we've given you is the procurement plan. The quality assurance processes all sits within the methodology component. They have to show us how they're going to do that. So in the methodology, they have to show us which quality management systems and processes they're going to use. Now, a lot of this comes down to something else I'm going to touch on in a second, because that sits with them to prove to us how they're going to do those things efficiently and effectively for us. You can get the most amazing quality management practice system in the world where you have 10 people go out and check everything in triplicate, and it'll cost you an absolute fortune. And then there'll be the standard jokes about council workers landing on shovels, staring in a hole. What we're trying to do is get them to come back to us with what that looks like. And that's one of the things that we then assess them against with each other. And this is really important, as I said, with emerging technologies, smart tablets, all of those things, the simple smart tablets that can take a before and after photo and a short description, a whole lot cheaper than having 3 people go out and verify it, because a picture says 1,000 words. So that's where it sits inside that part of it. You also know that we've been talking about in methodology that we don't want to pay people to go back out to find. So someone goes out, finds a fault, lodges a fault, someone comes out and verifies it. Third person goes out to try and fix the culvert, and then they find out they need the jet truck for it. So in the methodology, we're asking for the patrolman should be able to fix with a shovel and a rammer most culverts. And if they can't, then it gets lodged as a fault. So we're trying to push those things over into the methodology, which will also kick off into this part of the procurement plan as well. So that's where a lot of those details will sit in there. That is also around the RFSs and the contractor failures. A lot of this comes through in their responses. So where contractors, we want to know how they're going to manage the request for service. What are the timeframes that they can commit to? Because we can have a 24-hour or 12-hour return period on an RFS, but it'll cost us a fortune. So it's around, well, what does that look like? What is our RFS response rate? What are the staff, the skills, and the expertise? That sits with them. Remember, these are really big companies tendering for this. We're not going to spoon feed them every single part of it. We want them to show us what they're doing in other parts of New Zealand and other parts of the world for some of them, because they may be innovations that we pick up and go, hey, that's a really cool idea. We want that here in Tairāwhiti. But very much part of the evaluation process. The stipulating the levels of management required in the contract, and this is what I was touching on before. 100% we want to say, where is your level of expertise for some of these things? So who is going to manage your health and safety? Where's your health and safety management team? What does that look like? Who's going to be taking care of that on your site stuff? We 100% want to ask those questions, because those are expected roles that we want to see in the contract. However, it could be one person covers multiple parts of that at the same time. You know that I have about 6 different parts of my hub. It's still one person. So it's the same thing again in these contracts, but we want to see that it's covered off in somebody's job description, that their job is fleet maintenance checks is done as part of that, but they're also the mechanic and the quality assurance that everything's up to health and safety level. That could be one person in the contract, but we want to know that it's in somebody's JD, because in their response, they'll have to tell us that that person's in charge of those things. Gee, it's really hard to read up there. Sorry for that. So this is in your paper too. So these are all in your papers. So the next steps. So we've given the notice of intent that we're going to come out to market. What we would like to do is, subject today, we're going to put out for the expression of interest, which will close on the 30th September. Obviously, the market signaling exercise, we've already got a pretty good idea of who has an expression of interest. There are a number of parties that have said they would love to see the documents. There are some that have said we're not coming to that region and we don't have any plan to in the future. Thank you anyway, which is fine. That then would mean that we would release our request for tenders on the 4th of October. And the tender period will go from the 8th of October until the 3rd of December. The evaluation period will go from the 6th of December to the 22nd of December. because no one's going to pretend that we're going to be working on this over Christmas. I'm not going to be one of those councils that puts it out and closes it on the 20th of December to then take 2 weeks off. So we will then bring the contract back to you for your first council meeting next year to look at our recommendations to appoint. There's a reason why we want to get done by February, just to remind everybody, is because the Waka Kotahi contracts come out second week of February. We want the market to know who our preferred supplier is by the time the Waka Kotahi contracts come out. And that's deliberate, and Waka Kotahi are absolutely supportive of that approach as well, because they don't want us both to have the market up in the air at the same time, because there'll be too much uncertainty for both parties. So they'd rather we'll have ours nailed away first. So then when theirs go out, the market knows where it's going to go, which is a good thing for us, because it means we get the contractors to come for ours, then the market can decide what it does when it comes to the Waka Kotahi ones. So the tender documents are being drafted up at the moment to cover off a number of the things that we've said. As you can tell from the way I'm talking about it, we look to the market to give us the answers for a lot of the things that we're talking about. We'll give detailed descriptions about what our network is and what the level of services that we're looking for, and then we're looking to them to inform that part of it with us going forward. The big thing for us is the change in the way that, as you know, the professional services have already started to come back in-house. So how we drive the work program sits with us as council going forward. It's how they respond to that work program is what we're looking for the market of this. So we want to see how the market's going to respond to how we do our maintenance contracts. So that is the end of the presentation, I think. Yep. Are there any questions? Apologies, I've just spoken for a long time.
No, that's good. What? Mr. Councillor Burdett, I'm sure you've got.
Microphone, Bill.
David, for
Microphone.
very detailed explanation. Two things. How the second and third tier contractors going to compete with the tier one contractors in terms of this? You know, and David knows, who the performing contractors are in the whole district. And you're the guys that make the decisions after you've come to us with recommendations. Over the last 10 years, we've gone along with what you've recommended. This is a huge change. It's a quantum leap from that last knock contract, which was a shambles in a sense, and the two prime contractors we had there. My question to you is, when you detail the areas that you're talking about, are there going to be homegrown based contractors that you look favorably at? And the reason I ask that question, I go back to the Wigan Bridge. Who was there? Who drove past it and never gave us any assistance? I go back to East Cape. Who was there and looked after us? So that's where I'm coming from on this one.
So through the chair, we've spoken to a number of the third tier contractors and gauged their interest and or ability to tender for some of these contracts. A number of them said they're going to try and go it on their own, and they're going to tender them because they believe they have the skills, expertise and scale to step up and do these contracts. So they've said that. A couple of third tiers have already said we'll go in under a tier one as their preferential contractor, and that's for their commercial reasons to do that. So part of why we're looking at those social outcomes is around how are they supporting the local economy and the local contractors to do things. So a lot of that will come down to that relevant experience and then also the social outcomes, which is why we've moved it in that way. But we are confident that the third tiers have all said they want to step up, and I've said to them, if you're going to step up, now's your time. You've asked for it. We've given it in a way that you have the ability to go to these contracts. The ball sits with them now. They can't keep complaining that we've put them out, because actually this is as open as we could be for the scale and the type of contracts that we've put out for them.
Chairman. David, how do you know, probably better than me, whether those second and third tier contractors have the backroom expertise to undertake what you've put in front of us? If they've got a contract, that kind of expertise in, we pay for it, don't we?
So through the chair, we've been really honest with all of the contractors around what our expectations are for the minimum accreditations and the systems that they will need to have in place in order to get one of these maintenance contracts. And that's where some of them have decided to, yep, we're fine, we're going to have a go. And others have said, we're going to try and partner with a larger company in order to do this work. But at the end of the day, that's their commercial decision, whether they go for it or not. But the big difference between a third tier contractor and a tier one is that back of house big machine that keeps them safe and keeps us safe. And as I keep saying, we need those tier ones, we need those quality assurances, we need those health and safety insurances. That's a really important part of what they do. But it's the on the ground delivery that we're really trying to make sure they're doing right.
Thank you.
Right, I've got a lot of hands up. So first we go to Councillor Seymour.
An assumption that those budgets reflect the newest information that we've got from Whakatane with our funding, right? Around the social aspect of it and sustainability, those particular things, it's really good to hear about the artificial intelligence that the bigger companies have in their vehicles. Two things about that. If the vehicle is going to interpret what they see on our rural roads, what confidence can we have that the contractors are going to use that data? I mean, they can collect it. The vehicle will collect it, you just told us. But how do we know that they'll then do anything with it? And so there's a similar thing around the same. Are those tier 2 or 3 people going to be penalised because potentially their vehicles at this point in time won't have that same equipment within them?
So through the chair, the AI is an emerging technology that a number of tier ones are developing. It's an example I'm using of the type of thing that can be done. With us pulling professional services back in-house, it's so that we can have more control of the RAM data. So that's our asset condition assessments, our asset data that we have. We just call it RAM, okay? So the system that captures it, it goes into RAM. What we want to have is that our staff are the ones that own that information and we direct the work program going forward. So the fundamental shift is the work program will actually be done by council and given to the contractors to deliver. At the moment, the contractor comes up with a maintenance program, gives it to us to approve and then goes and does the work. We're flipping that on its head. So things like the data information will come to council for council to set the work program to then put that back out. So that will sit back in-house rather than with a third party like it does right now.
Thank you. And then I had just a couple of other questions. The other one was respect to the Hikurangi area. I mean, would we expect that pro rata that would be slightly more expensive to deliver than what might be delivered closer to town, albeit we are looking to have local contractors, because there's still costs and distance for equipment or not equipment, but tool resources to do the work, metal and all those things that aren't necessary right at your doorstep. Sorry, yes, I'm sorry about that.
I can answer.
And that happened yesterday. I'm sorry. I just
So just to reiterate through the chair, it's around the cost in each of the district and whether or not Hikurangi may be more expensive given its isolation, how far away it is. One of the things we want to test is what is the cost per metre per kilometre for Hikurangi, because at the moment we can see the volume of work and we can see a lot of the costs, but it's around, well, what's the best way to deliver that? And it's obvious that it's not having it supported from down here in Tūranga when you're trying to get resources up into Te Araroa, for example. So that's why we're looking at a different way with resource based up there to cut down the loss of productivity with driving time, but then also to look at having that resource up there to get better productivity out of those contractors based up there, which is why we want to pull it out to actually assess. Just as we do now, there are different rates across the district depending on the location. So I am absolutely expecting to get a different rate for each of these things in each of these contracts. Whether or not it's a fair price is the bit that we'll be looking for from the market and how we interpret those.
Right.
Thank you. And my third question relates to vegetation control, which is actually quite substantial across the district as a whole. And I just wonder that the 1 million, is that really deemed to be adequate, or is that only a part of it? Because some contractors are getting almost that much now, I understand.
So through the chair, the vegetation we're talking about is only for the roading maintenance, and that's our roading maintenance. This doesn't include townships. It doesn't include any other mowing. This is just the verges for us on the rural. So that's our budget on our roading network budgets. It's not the other parts. It doesn't include your community caretakers or those things. It's done separately.
When I
Right.
read in the document, it talked about lawn mowing and mowing, and so I interpreted that to mean all mowing. Thank you, that's fine. And then do we expect the fact that these figures are available to have in it on page 35 of our papers? What impact do we think that will have on the potential contractors?
So through the chair, we're being very deliberate. This has been a change in approach that we've had in the last couple of years as an organisation, where we give the overall budgets out. And I will 100%, I think it's one of the huge things that's credited why we're delivering so much capital works, because we're taking the guesswork out. The contractors know, I mean, for Hikurangi, for example, the last thing I want is to have a range of contracts come in 5 times the price that we can afford and then try and negotiate them down. So we're being upfront. This is the available funding. And if you look deeply enough within our annual plans and annual reports, you can find this information anyway. It's publicly available. So we're fronting it to say, this is the size and scale so that we get the response back from it. How you break that up is whether or not you can make it profitable or not. And that's what we're looking to see the contracting market do for us with those budgets now, knowing that. Remember, the big cherry that sits on top is the flood works and the capital works. If they're doing their maintenance, they get their flood works, and the flood works is the immediate cleanup stuff that they get to go and do. That can be a huge spend on top every year, and they get to do some of their capital work. So that's the bit that they want to see as part of these two.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Hughes on Zoom here. It's a good question.
Oh, sorry, were you talking to me?
Yes, you're.
Sorry,
you're
my
right.
Wi-Fi is cutting in and out, so it's a bit
Okay.
hard to hear. Yeah, my question is just around the price weighting, and you might have just answered it. Is the price weighting so low because of this, the ceiling budget?
So through the chair, 30% is quite high for us as an organisation. So that's quite a high weighting to have, and it's something that comes from Waka Kotahi as a minimum. We need to make sure it's a significant component of it.
Okay.
Thanks, Isaac. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, David. Great report. I'm actually really excited about it. There were echoes of roadmen in there actually, but anyway, we won't go there. I'm happy to move this paper, Mr. Chair, if you need somebody to move it. So I'm happy to do that. I have a couple of questions. Is it possible, given your location-based focus, for one contractor to garner contracts in roading, vegetation and streetlights, which means that they're then looking after their local rural township as well as the rural roads connecting into it?
So through the chair, the vegetation and the lighting are region-wide. They need to be for the economy of scale. We wouldn't give that to one of the contracts. We wouldn't break it out for someone to go in. We need that economy across the district, just with the gear and everything that's in there.
Okay. And then coming back to your GDC team, how big do you see that being? You've already addressed what they'll actually be doing. And then just looking on page 39, you speak about external consultants through an existing engineering professional services panel contract. Where does that sit in those costs? Yeah, how, is this built into these costings or is this over and above?
So through the chair, the external consultants for the engineering professional services panel sits outside of these works. For some, it is included in the overall budget, however. So when we do flood works or capital works, say it's a $2 million job, that will include the professional services, and then there will be the component for the physical works. But we normally do that in the budget breakdown. When we pull the bid together or the claim, we will look at the project, overall project budget, and we include that within the physical works and the professional services as well. A lot of those things we don't bring in-house. These are the ones because of the compliance levels for the cost of keeping staff compliant. But then also, for example, I'll use Wigan Bridge, for example. We don't do things like Wigan Bridge all day, every day. I'd rather give that to a contractor who does that all day, every day and can help with those designs and do those things through, because we don't have enough to keep them current. So there are some things we won't bring in. There are other things we do want to bring in because it's so important that we need it for just the skills or the specialist nature of it.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to see the renewed or reviewed weightings, I still am concerned that the sustainability / social outcomes is too light for that particular focus. And I'm really wondering how you can incentivize. So for example, having artificial intelligence, yep, that saves cars on roads, which reduces the carbon footprint. Having locality-based teams, in theory, stops someone traveling from here in town up to Pawtucket to do a job. But I just feel that a 10%, defining it as 10% is too low and marginalizes it, and it's so critical to this region and to our planet, and it should be a lens that runs right over the contracts, not just defined as a 10% weighting. And also, how are the contracts incentivizing the tenderers or the contractors to actually then implement smarter changes, better changes? How do we then measure that? How do we acknowledge that? How do we reward that? Because that's what we want. We want contractors who are always looking to do things in a more sustainable and climatically smarter way for our region and our planet. So that's the bit I really want to see strengthened up in this process, please.
So through the chair, the social outcomes and sustainability at 10 and 10% each respectively is a significant chunk for this type of procurement that we're doing. A lot of the things that we talk about, Councillor Robinson, we do through the evaluation and then the contract. So as you say, when it comes to, they put forward an innovation that lowers emissions, we would look to see reporting on that as part of the contract that came through. If we were wanting to put targets into the new contract, which we are able to do at a later stage, so before we sign the contracts, we can put those things in with the implications of it. We can put targets in, but we need to baseline and work through what those innovations are as part of it. This part of the procurement process, we really do want to sound the market out to see what's available in order for us to do these things, and then what are the cost implications for those as well. And that's part of why through this process, having these in there to then drill down and evaluate against each other, to then say that's what we're going to pick taking forward. And that's why we've kept it as the levels that we have. If we change some of the other ones out, there's a real danger that we start to water down some of the essential things that we need, like the relevant experience and skills. You can get somebody that might have amazing social outcomes, but actually they don't have this required skills or experience on the network to do that, all the right methodology. So it really is that real fine balance between them as to where you want us to put those scores.
Thank you, Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, look, I really commend these changes. There's major changes from the previous contracts. And it's great to see that it encourages local contractors as well. And that's certainly reflective of the amount of local contractors that are tendering at the moment. So my question is that we had a COVID-related government-funded training for schemes program, and a lot of trainees have come out of that. Has that strengthened the capability of the local contractors to be able to be in the position now that they are to be able to tender for these contracts? Has that increased the workforce?
So through the chair, the procurement of these contracts and the contractor base, the work started on our third tiers probably 2.5 years ago around building up capacity within region. You'd be able to tell by the amount of quite nice equipment driving around the region at the moment on the back of a hauler. There's a significant increase in gear and capability. Definitely the last 2 years worth of investment from PGF and our TRIP funding has built up the capacity, and particularly in health and safety and monitoring and reporting, huge increase in our third tiers. And we've been really conscious along the way to remind them that this is coming up. Similar with the big companies as well, not just down as Benham region. You've seen Higgins, you've seen Fulton, you've seen Heb. There have been a number of other contractors in region as we've built up towards where we're going to with these contracts. And that's been absolutely deliberate. As I keep saying, we need healthy competition for these contracts.
Councillor Green.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. One was about the review situation that we've been asked to look at. I'm just wondering who does that review and what is the cost of it? And if it's not done now, when is it done?
Sure. So with the 17A review, it's something that you can choose to, you're able to not do it because of what we've proposed in the paper, that we've been through the market research that we have. We've been through the Three Waters 17A reviews. So we did one for the Three Waters contract. We did a 17A review. The changes that are happening with Three Waters are, and we do not believe that the cost and exercise of doing one at the moment. Three Waters, I think we spent about $50,000 when we did that one on a full 17A review. And I think it took about 3 months to do the process. So it's quite a truncated process, and we don't believe you will get a different outcome from what we've proposed. So with the paper, we have taken external legal advice on this from Simpson Grierson as well, and they believe that it is within our discretion to do what it is, and they do think it is reasonable what we've proposed. So as long as it's recorded through a resolution like we've asked for today, then we have met and satisfied the 17A requirements is what we have advice on from Simpson Grierson.
Thank you for that. Also, I was just wondering why the Pavement people, why their contract is 3 years and the other people are 5 years.
So through the chair, the Pavement contract, we want to do 3 years because we want to see how the market's moving, and it's moving really quickly in sealed pavement maintenance.
Okay.
So previously, councils across the country used to have their own chip sealing teams within region, and they would service a region. They move now. So the sealing season normally kicks off in Tauranga first for us at the moment with JML. They'll start in Tauranga, they'll come here on their way to Hawke's Bay and then finish in the South Island. What we want to do, and the technology is changing quite quickly and the players in the market are changing quickly. So we just want to see how that's evolving and see how it works given the current trends and the way things are working at the moment. Also, there's a lot of uncertainty at a national level, just given everyone's competing for the big resource as well with the extra investment in infrastructure.
Awesome, thank you.
Councillor Shelton.
Thank you, and thank you, Dave, for a very comprehensive report. Do you have any concerns or foresee any gaps that, you know, the tendering process might still leave you at the end?
So through the chair, and we allude to this in the report, the thing that we will need to see is the market step up in each of the areas in order to get a valid contract and a competitive contracting base going through. So we have cut it up into 4. If we don't have that, we would look to go back to and retender and join them together if we needed to going forward. Currently, I don't think that is an issue for us, and the market is saying that they want the tenders the way that they are, and they can understand and get why we've broken them up the way they are, and that there's a healthy appetite in each of those areas. Worst case scenario is that we don't have one area isn't looking good, we can go back to the ones who are in the running for the other tenders and offer it to them as well and see what happens.
Cool, just supplementary and just further what Debbie just said. So they initially like 5-year contracts outside the one being the 3.
So 5-year contract, and you then get to win an extra 2 based on performance going forward. So 5 + 1 + 1, which is about right in our industry for depreciation, return on investment. That's about the standard. Can go longer. However, it starts to limit the ROI for us as an organisation because a grader needs replacing by the stage. Staff have turned over. 5 + 1 + 1 helps keep us in a good rotation with other contracts that are going out across the country as well, which is something we have been mindful of.
And I assume that with, you know, for vehicle replacements for the contractors, it's going to lay out some more certainty for them.
So through the chair, you definitely need to give them certainty of tenure in order for them to bring their rates to something that's comparable. Otherwise, the rates reflect the short ROI for them.
Thanks, Dave. Just, yes, Councillor Wilson.
I'll see if I can make any sense of my notes. Thank you for starters for the comprehensive presentation, and that did cross off quite a number of my questions, which is helpful. I still have a couple though. So the first is around the quality assurance and its relationship to sustainability. So I note that you've highlighted that the systems and processes, quality assurance and systems and processes is a component of the maintenance contracts. However, systems and processes aren't outcomes, and continually or renewing something earlier than it should have been or repairing something earlier than it should otherwise have been is inherently unsustainable. because it essentially involves doing something twice, which is doubles your, emissions, doubles your labour, doubles everything. So I maintain that that quality assurance still needs to be somewhere that's reasonably visible so that we can kind of lean into it. I'm happy for sustainability to be 10%, but I believe that quality assurance should be part of that sustainability measure, for the simple reason that if you do it once, you do it right, and you don't visit it for 10 years, you've cut all of the things that we want you to cut, as opposed to, and I'll give you a great example. So grading doesn't have a specific quality assurance mechanism, because you went on to explain what it does in sealing. That makes a lot of sense. However, if you send a grader up to cover 80 kilometres of road, and you've only gone one side, gone the other side, you haven't bothered to fill in the potholes beforehand, 5 days later, that road looks exactly the same as it did prior to grading. And you send someone out again in another 2 months, as opposed to in 6 months. So the impact still exists. How do we capture that? And I'm not finished, so answer that. And then I'll keep
Can I answer that one first, because I know you're going to have another question. So through the chair, a lot of that comes down to methodology and what's approved. So under the SEC contracts, they had given a per metre rate that was exceedingly low for the maintenance grading. The reason it was so low was because they didn't have any rolling in the budget. So their methodology was to place the metal, grade it, and then carry on. So they didn't roll it, because they said that, well, the logging trucks will roll it when they go over it with a 50-ton load. Of course, none of them went over it at 30k an hour. They all went over it and the road disappeared pretty quickly. So that innovation and methodology wasn't any good. So when we get the methodology back from the contractors, that's where they start to stipulate some of the things that you're talking about, Councillor Worsnop, where they say, this is our methodology and how we will maintain an unsealed road. This is the gear, this is the people, this is the way that we will do it. And that's how we evaluate the prices against each other. There's industry standards that they know they have to meet, but how they actually do them is and there's hundreds of different ways for maintaining an unsealed road, and each have different pros and cons. And we'll look and evaluate those as they come back and through. When you talk about the capital replacement and versus the maintenance of things, so if a road's going, rip it up, do a proper rip and rehab and put it back in place, that's exactly what we're trying to get to with the sealing and the rehab program. We're trying to pull money into the rehab program so that we fix it before it becomes a really big issue for us. So a lot of things, instead of fixing and actually then finally replacing, it's actually just put it down for replacement, fix it once, and we won't see it again for another 5 years, hopefully, rather than continually maintaining things. So part of those splits in the budget that we're working with Pauline and her team around is, well, what's a capital improvement so that we can do a proper fix on it versus what's actually just maintenance. And that's what we're fine tuning with some of those details that we're doing as part of the contract now.
That leads to my second question, which is around presuming that we've looked at all that and we've gone, hey, yeah, we think you're going to meet X, Y, and Z based on your methodology, based on this and this and this. Where in here do we hold the levers? I mean, you did sort of address it and you touched on it a little bit in terms of, the outcomes if, we'll just send you back. But again, sending you back is not sustainable. I think there needs to be something heftier than we're going to keep sending you back. In actual fact, if we've had you back 3 times, there should be an automatic penalty of some kind. So do we have the ability to give preference to contractors who say, hey, look, I'm prepared to wear X or Y or Z if we fail in this particular area persistently? Do we give weighting to their ability, their willingness, essentially, to sign up to something like that?
So through the chair and the contract, there will be performance measures that we will be doing with the maintenance contractors around their delivery of works, the quality of delivery of works, and the rate that they're delivering. So we have a number of proposals and levers within the contract that we'll be putting forward to them. So if they're delivering their maintenance on time to the quality they want, they get a carrot, which is they will get the emergency works as of right within their region, and capital works up to a certain value within their region as well as of right. As soon as they stop performing, they start to lose the capital works, they start to lose the emergency works. We then also have levers, and that's where it becomes around, you lose your +1s, which is really hard because that costs them millions of dollars. But then we can also bring in things which they're not contract head. However, they're not the behaviors or outcomes that we want, where we start to find people from those contracts. We can have those in the contracts, but once we put those risks in, we then have to evaluate what premium that adds to the price with the risks that we bring in. The quality assurance is part of what we want to see, the quality of the works. Everybody wants to do it once and do it right. And that's why that methodology and the checking of it and then proving to us that they've done it to the quality that we've spec'd is the important part of what they need to provide in their proposals to us.
Just really want to emphasize the fact that us checking up on them and going off what they've said has been done has worked particularly poorly for us in the past. And that having in the back of their mind the fact that actually if I'm caught out with this, it has pretty big immediate implications, not at the end of my 3-year contract or 5-year contract or whatever it might be, because we're going to have a little bit of a maze of contracts here. It's going to be incredibly intensive for you to keep track of all this. So therefore we want them managing their behavior rather than us managing their behavior. Just feedback, I suppose, more than anything. And that feeds into my point about contract tenure. A lot of them have a 5-year and a 2-year. Is there anything stopping us being sort of smaller but longer brackets, 3 by 3 by 3 or something like that, where in actual fact you get plenty of time, but we're going to keep you on your toes, knowing that in 3 years' time, you've got to revisit this.
Through the chair, if we went shorter with our contracts, we would see a premium jump straight in. So if we said you've only got 3 years of certainty, you've got to earn the rest, we would immediately see a markup come into the contract. So 5 +1 +1 is the best way to do it. Remember, we have and we do often withhold payment, which really hurts contractors too when we don't pay. So if we're really not happy with something, we just simply don't pay for it. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars being withheld over a month. You'd be amazed how quickly even the big multi-billion-dollar companies will jump very quick.
Yeah, well, that's helpful. Just touching on Waipawa, I take on board your explanation for the size difference and the costs difference. However, even if you account for the big chunk that's going into pavement resales, and the fact that I think somewhere in here it mentions something like 80% of our sealed network is due for some kind of rehab. Waipawa still has probably 50 to 80% higher amount of unsealed road than Uawa, and yet it's got barely any more budget. That just speaks to the amount that we're pouring into the forestry roads, who don't pay twice the amount of rates that anybody else pays. How does this link into the conversation that has been around this table in LTP around the work that we're going to do to try and get some more balance into that equation, because we're not doing it through rates? And frankly, what it means is that when it comes to your emergency works, and even your pavement repairs, based on the pressure that on those sealed roads that are up there, you're going to get more of that poached for those forestry roads than we set out initially. We know that it happens every time. So given that, Waipawa is still massive, and it's underfunded, I think it will likely to become underfunded. How do we make it smaller? Can the city boundaries extend further? Because in your map, it seems to go around the townships, but in this map, it's purely hard up against the city boundaries. So what are our options there?
So through the chair, the budgets have been set by council with this LTP, and they're the budgets that we're working with when it comes to this. So
Where they sit is not good.
the budgets for the work that we have, we believe Waipawa has the share that it has always had of the volume of spend that it would have going forward. Is we have not cut the budgets to Waipawa. They are as they are. That's a decision higher than me. As part of what we're trying to do with the contracts, the city is a very different contract than a rural roading contract. And we're trying to keep the gear that would need to be kept in the city out of the rural contracts. And that's deliberate, because when you look at the city contract, a lot of it's sealed potholes, it's drainage cleaning and gutters, it's sucker trucks and those sort of things. So it's different kit than what you need for a rural network that's unsealed predominantly. So we're trying to make sure the right resources are in the right places.
So my point was not to send them up the Kenakanai Road. It was, why not be out around Tikaraka, Paratahi, Manutuki, Muriwai, because they still need the same thing, presumably.
So through the chair, those will be picked up through the Resales program, and the community caretakers will pick up a lot of that work. I'm happy to have a conversation with you offline around some of the detail of some of these things if you want to.
Sorry, my last point was around the fact that the procurement options report does seem more detailed than our proposed contracts work and scope. An example is the fact that potholes are not even mentioned in our contracts, whereas they are the fourth bullet point in the procurement options report. And there's a series of other things where the procurement options report is more detailed. Is there a reason why we have been less detailed in our proposed contract?
So through the chair, this is the procurement plan. This is not the detail that's going to go out to the contractors. There's a huge volume of information that will go out to the contractors. The specs about 900 odd pages. That covers off a lot of the things you're talking here. I didn't think to bring that to the committee unless you'd like to read 4 versions of your worship's face lit up.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate the work that's gone into this. Wrapped to see it coming to life. Can't wait.
I'll just come in there. I was about to say some of the things Kerry stated just as I come in there, but for me, the outcomes and probably the attribute of sustainability and environmental management, I think of specifics. And I know I've brought up here in the past that perhaps the vegetation contract could have an element of clearing the roadsides of the litter that they've got at the moment. For me, an outcome is a beautiful tairāwhiti. But taking that a step further with the vegetation contract, and I know it's Wakatai Kotahi, but I'm just driving past every day now a vegetation contract that was along State Highway 35 by the school there, and they've come along and they've chopped the trees down, they've chopped the phoenix palms down, the phoenix fronds are all over all the fences, the litter is just laying everywhere, and it was done months ago. And, you know, so, I mean, I did hear you say that if they don't do it right, we send them back. So, I mean, that's one that I drive past every day, but I'm sure it's happening in other places as well. I spoke to the guy that sits in the truck that is the pilot vehicle for the mowing contracts along the side of the road. And he was so happy because he sits in his truck for an hour, reads a book, and then he moves for a kilometre, turns off his truck and then reads his book for another hour. Now, surely, you know, there must be efficiencies we can do towards the litter control. And it's not litter anymore, it's rubbish. You know, it's got to, I'm back on my bike, so I'm back on my other bike as well. And I'm seeing it all the time. So could there be an element of beautification in the contracts? I mean, that they can leave all those phoenix palm fronds, they're just everywhere on that, and it just looks so ugly. So an outcome of a beautiful region is not addressed. You know, I see no reason why it couldn't be. So there's that. And the other thing I just wanted to query was you stated that the efficiency of having them up into the other regions there is having the infrastructure on site. Is that contracted? I mean, you've got these national companies that will have these big, you did state that there are 2 graders on one of the sites at all times, but the other equipment there, is there any obligation to them to maintain the equipment in that region? Or if something happens in Whakatane, say they think we've got this huge job there, we better go and grab that digger.
So through you, Chair, for when it comes to location-based resource, it has to be doing the volume that we expect it to be and doing the schedule that we've asked for it to be. In the north, for example, Downer have subcontracted that work out. So Blackbees have been doing the grading up there for the last 9-10 months. They've been on the network, so they do the grading on behalf of Downer up there. Troy Wheeler does a lot of their maintenance up there for them now too. So it's around, if the resource is there, they have to show that it's being productive, that it's being used. One of the key things with all of the roading maintenance is that productivity. We need to see that the gear's down with the grader, that the blade's on the ground, moving material around. That's the key thing that we need to see. And that's what we're looking to see in these productivity gains going forward.
So just a comment on the first job I had, the boss drove me mad because every second day he said to me, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And he drummed that into me. I don't see the jobs getting done well sometimes. And that vegetation out at Wainua is a classic example of it. And I'm sure it's. So is there any element of that within the contracts where, hey, you know, you just, and it was what, the same as Councillor Woolston was saying.
Through the chair, thankfully that's wakakote.
Yeah.
When it comes to the work being done well, we push the teams to make sure it's done to the quality that we want. We'll have over 800 people on the network working for us right now. And I'm only as good as the person who's on the end of that machine for when you drive past it. None of us let it go when we go past, and the quality assurance gets pulled up every single time that we can get it. We pull them up on it. But even then, 2,000 k's of road, we can only be on every part of it.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you mentioned those palm trees, I will take this off. Before you mentioned the palm trees, I was happy to second it because it has been moved, but I wanted to check with Councillor Faulkner that she moved the supplementary recommendations, and I'm happy to second those. But can I just say, with respect to those palm trees, which irritate me just as much, and the Chief Executive will know, that was raised with the new NZT regional Whakatahi person at a briefing that we had, and she was heading up the coast with a couple of other Whakatahi staff, and she was asked to look at those trees and potentially take them out. But I think there's some debate about whether they're Whakatahi trees or the private landowners, because they actually build inside the fence. But it is absolutely dreadful that they look like they do. The fronds have been cut off them and just dumped. Some are cut off individually, and some landowners are clearly clearing some of those food carvers and letting the branches fall on the side. So it has been raised through our NZTA briefing, and when Whakatahi come to our next meeting, I certainly will be asking what they will do about it, because it is an eyesore. It's just never been cleaned up, and it just looks worse and worse, and they'd be better to be taken out altogether. She asked me how many trees there were, and I said a quick guess, 30, but when I counted them on the way home, there's about 35. And she did say when we had our meeting, oh, I thought there might be only a dozen, but there are around 35 planted right along that subdivision. But they do need to go because they do cause injury to people, but just who's going to pay for the removal and cleanup remains to be seen, but it is on our radar. Thank you. And I'm happy to second the paper, second the recommendation, and thank you for the detail, Mr. Wilson.
Councillor Gardner.
There's always one paper that gets so much. It's so in depth, David. I just want to thank you so much for giving me something to really kind of get my head in the space of our roading network. Wouldn't you love it if the government reformed roading, left the water alone? And anyway, fundamentally, I just want to say, you said the term economy of scale 8 or so times. That's the punch statement here. So within that framework, is there a assurance around equity? I was trying to figure out, like, you know, when you gave us the numbers, because often our rural communities pushback often is around, you know, roading funding for their network. And so does equity come into that mix, or is it just that the scale is based on those RAMs you mentioned earlier? That's my first question.
So through the chair, it comes down to network need is what drives us most on what we do. So when we do our roading budgets around where do we need to spend it to make sure our roads are up to scratch is what is our biggest driver. And it's asset condition and safety is our huge thing that we're looking at. So that's where it comes to, regardless if it's rural versus urban versus anything. It's around where does the network need, and that's what drives us. That's when we become straight engineering.
Yeah, and my second question, because I know everyone's dying for a cup of coffee, is you went all geek on AI. I heard you say the sustainable space in there, and I've often raised it in regional transport as well. As a lot of the contractors' feedback was that, you know, there's no challenges, no kind of, you know, I was quite surprised that no one mentioned the roading network itself as far as what's made of. Like, as far as the science of our roading network, we often challenge because it's a moving geology. So in the science of the sustainability, is that something we can expect some work to be done into maintenance and resilience work, because our roading network is challenged just because of what it's made of or not made of? So is the AI portion of that going to be something that maybe will help?
So through the chair, that we will always see innovations that will come through this process that we would love that we can't afford. So the unsealed network could be fixed hugely in this area if we lime and cement stabilized huge amounts of it. It comes down to the affordability of those things. And that's where a lot of the innovations that will be proposed, we will have to look and see, are they worth the investment? And actually, first of all, do we have the investment to give? So we'll need to look at those as they come through, but there are a number of different innovations that have been happening since we tendered our local roads contracts last. Reuse of material in situ, a whole range of different things that can be done to try and lessen the volume of material moving, but it all comes at a cost. So we just need to look at what can we afford and what's fit for purpose for our road network here in Tairāwhiti.
All right, thanks for that, David. A huge piece of work and lots of complexities in there, so well done. We've had Councillor Burdett. I was just
Wonder,
Yeah.
given the huge impact the logging industry has on our roads, how do we handle that financially? Do they contribute in any form?
In the RLTP, and there's a paper that's going to go up to the Regional Transport Committee, we have been successful in getting some funding assistance rate for works that will be subsidised with forestry paying the component of it as part of it. So Donna and her team have got a really good relationship with the Eastland Wood Council and working on where they're going to be, where they're going to impact, what does maintenance look like. You know that we've got maintenance agreements for some roads with them. So we have been working as part of separate from the procurement of these maintenance contracts, but we are looking at how we do things better with them going forward.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. It's been moved by Councillor Faulkner and seconded by Councillor Seymour. Nothing further. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Cup of tea. Yeah. Cup of tea. Cup of coffee. which is the Waipawa Cycle Trails update from regard, I've replied to him about that. The answer was 2018. When were we consulted about this? I just replied 2018. I don't know yet. All right, who are we? 218. So Josh around, is he? Is Josh on? Where? Oh, he's on. Yeah, there he is.
Kia ora, councillors.
Yeah, morning, Josh. You want to lead us into this, or?
Yeah, sure. Please just take the report as read. The only thing to add to the report really is around the resource consent processing application for the cycle trail. A decision is expected on that next week. Apart from that, happy to respond to questions.
Thank you. Councillor Wharehenga.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the report of a project that I'm really keen to see get landed for our community. In the papers, it talks about what is happening between our Gisborne Cycle Trust and Paukahu Whakata. I wanted to know specifically, and this is in regards to the dunes trails. I wanted to know, is there specific part of that dunes trail that is relevant to those conversations, and then other parts that aren't relevant to the combos, or is it the entire dunes trail that's relevant to the kōrero we have with Paukahu and Whakata? Obviously, to give rationalization to the question, it's about, you know, how we've already done chunks of it, possibly maybe apply that same thinking to the dunes trails.
So through the chair, when we took this project on behalf of Trust Tairāwhiti, it was to get the consent and build it from Waikana to Waipawa, as the committee's aware. Once we went into the resource consenting phase, we became aware there's a number of unresolved issues between mana whenua groups there that need to be resolved between Rongo Whakaata Iwi Trust, Paukahu Trust, Kōpututia Trust, and a number of other landowners. So those issues are for them and theirs to resolve, but it exists along that dunes trail. So we've said to TT, it's not for us to resolve these. They will come back when at a later date. So we've delivered the components for Trust Tairāwhiti to get the work done. They've said that they will look to pick up anything further when it comes to consenting in those conversations, because Josh has got some fair few Ks of stock bank that he's got to finish, and we've got a number of other things that we need to be focused on. So we gave it back to TT for them to resolve those components.
Well, thank you, Dave. So just for clarity, the parts that we've done that are within our brief, we've done as much as we can in regards to land and cycleways is within our brief.
Through the chair, we've done as much as we're able to do with our current consent and budgets, and made Trust Tairāwhiti that was all we were able to do, that the rest of it sits with them.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. I'm also happy to move this paper, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I've got quite a long history with the cycles and walkways here, and this one I was quite involved. Just a bit of history on that, because there's 5 councillors here that probably weren't here at the time that we were virtually taking a digger off the truck to do this work, and it got stalled. This was one of the late initiatives of Mayor Foon, and the funding was specifically for Awapuni to the Waipawa River mouth, and I am not comfortable now to have that funding moved over to another project, if you like, and I do see it as another project. Even though I'm fully supportive of cycles and walkway, I see this as a huge handbrake for the intention that we had at the start. I'm hearing you on the issues that we have. We had at the start of this, where it became an issue, we had a meeting down on site with Rongo Whakaata, and to a man or woman, they were saying that they definitely loved the idea of the walkways, cycleways. They were very enthusiastic about the connections to Manutuki and Muriwai, and For me, it's about connectivity, and the connectivity for me is doing it in a logical sequence of going along from where it is now to where we want to go. There's some great opportunities to Runga Whakaata there to tell their stories down there, some amazing stories down there. And I'm sure they're aware of that and starting to think about that. But I don't want to see the budget move from this to the other project, because it will be all of the budget that's required for this. And I just know the handbrake of going right back to square one and getting another budget to do this job, which would be awesome to have that cycleway going from the river mouth all the way along the beach, around the harbour, round, following our river out, and the options of going up there. It just extends the option we've got at the moment of what we're doing. So to break it up like this, I am not in favour of at all. So options going forward. I hear a lot about how nothing too much is happening, but we sat down with Runga Whakaata, and the thing that they said to us was kanohi to kanohi. We haven't had that at a high level. We see here that the trust has been given some responsibility to negotiate with Runga Whakaata. I don't believe that's the right level for those discussions. I believe the level should be right up at us again. When we had those first meetings with Runga Whakaata, the intention was to have more meetings with them and discuss issues. And this is an issue. This is a real issue for me, because 2018, like I say, we spent a lot of money on this project to get it to where it's got to, and all we've done is dribs and drabs of it at this end. So I'm not comfortable with that at all. So for me, it would be about sitting down with Runga Whakaata and trying to get some idea. And if the idea, if what comes back for them, hey, this is never going to happen, then at least we know. But at the moment, we're kind of second guessing, and that second guessing is not the way to do business with something that, you know, that's been hanging around for a while. So yeah, that's my position on it.
So can I just clarify for the committee, this isn't Runga Whakaata are not the only opposer to this project going forward. As I said, there are a number of interested parties that have issues that need to be resolved along that stretch. So I don't want it to be portrayed that it's been Runga Whakaata that slammed a massive handbrake on this. That there are a number of unresolved issues along through there that need to be resolved. The reason why we're putting our hands up as staff is because we only had a mandate to deliver this component for Trust Tairāwhiti. This isn't a council project. We have no resource. We have no mandate to carry anything on as staff. So just want to clarify that's where we sit. I just don't want it to become a beat up of RIT or anybody on this.
I'd like to counter that by saying there's going to be issues with it on the flood banks as well. You know, we haven't explored that yet, and I'm sure there's going to be issues coming out of that as well. All I'm saying is let's really understand the position where it is and not be second guessing it.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, what does Trust Tairāwhiti think about this?
So through the chair, Gavin and I have had regular conversations about it. They understand where we're at. They've also had their conversations with the interested parties as well. So they understand where we're at. They're comfortable with what we've done to date and understand the issues that are at play as well. So through the chair, Trust Tairāwhiti has a cycle program that they're looking to roll out across the district. So they have a number of initiatives that they're doing as part of their tourism. And I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but they have a number of initiatives that they're looking to fund. And this was the first tranche that came out, which they asked us to deliver. They fund and help the Tairāwhiti Cycle Trust for the work that they're doing. So they're going to work with them with it going forward as part of a number of other initiatives that they're working with them as well.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. So just my read on it is that this is really information we have not really much influence over what actually happens in here. Is it worth us offering, because we do have essentially we do have the option suggested in the email that was circulated last night as an interim measure, and frankly, I don't have a lot of faith in the issues that we have with regards to using the dunes being resolved because we have yet to resolve an issue for probably a number of the stakeholders, and that is the landfill. So I think in the interest of connecting everything up, surely we can propose an interim measure for the meanwhile. It just doesn't seem, logical to kind of just, not, surely we can do that.
So through the chair, we don't have this as a project for council. This is not a council project that we have mandate or funding or resource to do. So this is something we did while we had contractors there who we were able to manage this on behalf of TT. So this is a TT initiative. It's not in our long-term plan for us to do. We are working with a number of the stakeholders, and I've said to Gavin, more than happy to do the meetings with him and work through. So we're doing that part together, but when it comes to the project, we don't have the resource or the mandate to carry on with the Waikanae to Waipawa cycle trail.
Just supplementary to that, would we require resource to offer the road verge?
So through the chair, we have the designs, we have something that we had lodged a resource consent for. So we have all of that there, which we've said to Trust Wairawhiti, if they want to carry forward with it, they had funded it, that they can carry on with that. And I know that Motu Trails is looking to do some work there. The Cycle Trail Trust is looking to do work there. It's one that we're saying we've done as far as we can go as council staff and as council. It's for you guys, if you want to carry forward with that, for you to resolve. I don't have any other mandate than that.
Councillor Seymour.
Thank you very much. Then, so supplementary question to that response and to Councillor Warnock's question, does that then mean potentially that sum of money that's there could be used for whatever alternate cycle trail potentially along the side of the road rather than on the journeys actually comes up?
So through the chair, the funding that's there remains with Trust Wairawhiti is something that we're talking about how we prioritise and what would be the best investment for that. So we would like to eventually get the trail from Waikanae to Waipawa, and we've said we'll continue to work and look at what those options are through there. So the funding is something that we can work with TT, but it's around what are their initiatives that they're going to fund in this financial year in order for them to keep progressing forward with the number of projects that I know they have on their books.
Thank you, because, thank you for that. Yes, because I do think that attitudes to creating trails actually physically, if we talk about over-journeys, probably have changed since we first started talking about it. And I think we need to be aware that people are much more interested in protecting the dune infrastructure and the biodiversity of that dune infrastructure, and that cycle trails might be on the road verge rather than over dunes. And I think that that's probably a way forward, because we don't want to be party to carving up or allowing dunes to have actual physical cycle trails on the dunes themselves. It can be adjacent to the dunes or adjacent to a roadway. So I'm sure that some outcome along those lines can be arrived at. Thank you.
Councillor Faulkner.
I just wanted to, Councillor Seymour's actually pretty much know what I was going to say about the dunes, but I do want to just endorse what Councillor Cranston had to say as well about not letting this project just go. If we have options and we have plans, I think, Mr. Wilson, you've probably got our support from what I can hear as a group to do what we can as an organisation to join the dots.
Councillor Brown.
Kia ora, sorry, is it Josh, I said there. Kia ora, and Mr. Wilson, just want to say thank you. I get the benefit of using that space that's been created. It's just off from where I live. So utilising it at the moment, it's just grateful to see what we've constructed down there, and look forward to the continuance of it. I just want to ask, we've mentioned it already that we're at a stalled position, but I see this as a bit like with the skate park, having this initial group take it on as a real passionate project for them. So we've got key players, stakeholders who are wanting to consider this, and I guess our role is to support it because we see benefit in it, of course, but Is that what you're saying, Mr. Wilson, in respect to the current issues lie with a collective that need to talk about that land, you know, as it is? Because here we see land and whenua very differently, culturally, etc. And so we're trying to be mindful of that. But overall, we support this project and we will just do our part to ensure how that works will work in with for the best of the region. That's what we're saying today, isn't it?
So through the chair, we are proposing to put a cycle. So I'm going to be really blunt, excuse councillors, but we're proposing to put a cycleway on private property. The private property is Corporate Tia Trust, and the landowners there have some issues that they are resolving between landowners. We can't wade into those. They're private property and ownership issues, so therefore them to resolve. Once they're resolved, they're more than happy to come back and talk to us about those. So they need to be given the time and space to deal with those, to then come back to see if that's still appropriate for their private property, which they were looking to allow people to use, and they generously allow us to have public on that land now. So we need to give them the time and space and then pick that up in the future, which they are keen to do with us, but they've said, can we please make sure our issues we sort, and then we will come back and talk to you, which is why we've said, we'll talk to you when you're ready to
So it's
talk.
a bit of a tie. Well, I thank you for that, because I think in this framework, we could do the magic in this whole ideology of cycleway walkways, respect to our connectivity and all. And if we do respect that, then I think the outcome is always going to be better. So kia ora, thank you.
No, I had Councillor Foster.
Yeah, it's just a noting report, but I do appreciate the concerns of Councillor Cranston with the initial project and what it was intended and how it was intended. But at the end of the day, this is part of an extension that'll enhance the whole project. It's not as if you can't get down to the river already. You can get, there's a road down there, so that can be used by cyclists and walkers can walk on the side of the road, at least to access it for the next stage. And upgrade the next stage to the Waipawa Bridge seems to me like it's where we're hamstrung where we are at the moment with the landowners. So this is at least a continuation of this project, and then possibly going to Manatuki. So you know, for me, I see the relevance of this spending in this particular area to enhance what's already there, and it'll all be down to the numbers that use the road to get there to start with, and identifying the need for an off-road cycle track. But my question would be, when we get there, we're there already, but this will enhance that track. But the extension to Manatuki, would that take preference? Well, yeah, that's the extension from this part here now, isn't it? Along the rail line to Manatuki.
So through the chair, there's been a number of discussions over the years around a cycle network that uses the Waipawa flood control scheme as the spine and then drops off to the different townships along the way. When we put the resource consent in back in 2015, we were unsuccessful in getting that component have a resource consent due to a number of concerns raised with the commissioners that heard it. We've put in an access track for us to have an all-weather access on top of that walkway, which Trust Tairāwhiti has paid for. There is now a resource consent to let people have public access to that, which has been put forward by another party, which as Josh said, the decision's next week on that. Any extension of it is something that Trust Tairāwhiti, and we've been working with the Tairāwhiti Trails Trust around where should the next cycleways go. So for example, us as council, we have prioritised the Tarihiru cycleway as part of this long-term plan, and the Uawa connection cycleway. Those are the two that we've got on our books for this LTP. TT knows that there are more out there, so that's why they've put funding aside to do other trails across the district that will help complement and help do things like tourism and other connectivity. Manatuki and Muriwai are two areas that are on the wider plan for things, but they don't have funding at the moment and they haven't got consent. So part of what we are talking with the Tairāwhiti Trails and Motu Trails is what do they want to do and what do they want to deliver, and then how are other funders going to enable those things. So there are more cycleways, it's just we will not be the ones building all of them, which to be honest is a great result because it's the community looking to do those things and Trust Tairāwhiti paying for it.
Supplementary to that, so once it gets to, well, it's the Waipawa Bridge already then, and then with the Tarahiru cycleway, that can be connected to the Waipawa Bridge as well. So you've got a complete, cool.
Councillor Sheldon.
Thank you. I spent the weekend over the other side of the Cape and saw a whole lot of people riding the dunes in Apotiki, which is exciting. If I concur, I totally agree with Councillor Cranston. I think we've got to hang in hard on this one and keep in close. I think as an interim measure, we should just tidy up the left-hand side of the road going out to the river mouth, maybe drop a painted line along there and a bit of signs, watch for cyclists, and keep the thing swinging, because this connects all the way through to Motu, all the way really right through to Whakatane, ultimately where you can bike from the airport there all the way through to Gisborne and obviously through town and out Wainui and into Andy's greater plan of going up the other side of the coast, potentially. So I'd be surprised if the local cycle trail can convince and or work through this. I think we do need to be at the table as part of trying to help see the resolve here. But I also agree with Kerry here. We talked earlier, the dump, the old dump out there, issues around that possibly are masking this issue as well. So I'd be keen that we are at the table talking and not paying or whatever, and the money has been put up, that we hang on to that money. We'll see that the money is held to ultimately identify this. Cycle dunes it's not like motorbikes ripping through them, jumping around, whatever. It's usually a hard formed sort of little track and people stick to it. And it's fun riding. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson. No, you're right. Okay, I'd just like to clarify, it's not on top of the dunes, it's off the dunes. So, so that concern. There are a couple of spots where it was coming up the dunes for visibility, but it's not on the dunes as such. So, yeah, it is just a noting report. So, yeah, I think you probably heard from some of us that if there is an opportunity to discuss it at a higher level, then we'd definitely like to take that up. And on that note, the suggestion that we do have more kanohi to kanohi with Runga Whakaata, is that scheduled, or is that, because if it's scheduled, it would be an item of interest. I don't know if that's the mayor or the CE. What was the intention with ongoing relationship?
So what was sorry, can you I just wasn't.
No, that's all right. Yeah. I think because this issue is something that I believe needs to be discussed at as high a level as we can allow it. And we did have a meeting with Runga Whakaata, and as David said, it's not only them, and I appreciate that, but in the context of our relationship with the likes of Runga Whakaata, are we on a scheduled relationship with them, kanohi to kanohi? Because that was what came from the first meeting, the meeting we had with them. We need to sit around together and discuss our issues. And this for me is an issue. And it would be something that I would like to discuss kanohi to kanohi if we had the opportunity.
So sorry about that, through the chair. So in terms of so there is not a scheduled relationship per se, but Her Worship sent out some requests to have the governance to governance hui with one another. The basis for that would be starting and resetting that relationship and working out or having the dialogue around what our common outcomes are before you jump into an issues-based conversation, just to work up that relationship and trust. So that was very much the ball was in their court in terms of arranging a suitable time, recognising that they're currently not with a GM, they've got an acting GM in place, so they may be, and they are focusing on their own strategic plans at this time, but we can circle, I'm sure the mayor can circle back to see when that meeting can take place, and we're in level 2. So there is also a reluctance to meet in person.
All right, yeah, thanks for that. And it is just a noting report. So did I? Yeah, just moved it and second by councillor Arkwright Brown. Anything further? All those in favour? Against? Carried. 228, the Wainaki Transformation Program.
Kia ora.
And that's Amy England. Michelle, sorry. Go on, Michelle.
Got
Do you want to
thank
lead
you.
into this or just go straight into it as read?
I'm happy to take it as read. We do have Amy here waiting as well. So, so this one is here.
Thanks, Michelle. Councillor Arkwright Brown. That's all right.
Thank you for this report. This kind of, to me, leads on from what we were previously discussing in respect to a project that council, kind of the discussion background that 71% of the Palmore forest are native vegetation. So it's been wonderful to see, and obviously we were able to go up and have a good look and plant some native trees, etc. And so really for me, it reaffirms our relationship with mana whenua and constructs of stakeholder relationship that leads to really good outcomes. So I just wondered, in the space of this project being what it is in the now, what's the long term, like is this a forever construct, or that can lead on to other parts of region taking on what we've learned from this project? Is it going to be a continuance for decades to come? That's my question.
Through you, Chair. So this is what we see as a legacy project. So it's really it's been on the horizon for a number of years, and obviously with the funding that's been received recently, it's really kick-started something special for the region. So with that in mind, I see it as a starter legacy project. In terms of how that looks into the future, certainly further discussions need to happen in terms of replicating or making it happen elsewhere across the region. But I certainly see it as one of the important pieces that we want to ensure is that we're recording our experience and making sure we're sharing that story through this.
Thank you. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you for that. Whilst there's a couple of things I'm delighted with, which is the engagement of Trap and Trigger to start looking after some of the pests up through that country, because they need to be nailed quick smart. And the other thing was, just the sheer amount of mahi that's gone in so far up there when it comes to the actual planting and everything that's been done with regard to sourcing locally and just the way that that project is being run and the partnership that we're developing there is really exciting for me. I have one deep concern, and that's around the 29% that's left for forestry, and the fact that JNL have declined to enter into another rotation. I believe firmly that this is an investment opportunity, not for our generation, but for generations to follow. I would be wanting to see some very deep thought put into the options that are put before us as councillors to make decisions on when it comes to what we do with that remaining land. Because when it comes to forestry harvest, it has the potential to offset big projects that this community may need in 30 years' time when it comes to funding. And I just want to know that we make really sensible investment decisions about this remaining piece of land, not feel-good decisions. This has got to be a business. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour. You want to comment on that? Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, I would like to, if possible. Thank you, Chair. So thank you for that, and we do appreciate the sensitive nature of that balanced land. So Just as a further update to that, we have actually received today an expression of a proposal from our forestry experts on an approach to furthering our due diligence. So we are looking to expand our expression of interest process to seek inquiries from other commercial potential commercial futures. So what we are intending to do is to go through that due diligence over the next couple of months with a wide lens on, so that we can come back to you in November. It may possibly be a December meeting, but with a really informed recommendation that considers the economics of that balanced land, as well as social, environmental, and those more sustainable features. So we are progressing on that and do have that in mind.
Thanks. Councillor Seaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you very much for that explanation, because I too would like to see some commercial return for the ratepayers of the future, because that was always the purpose of the planting of that forest in the beginning, and protection of the pipeline by using pine trees at the time. And the world has moved on, and we have an area now being protected and native. So I'm pleased to hear that we're progressing that. And with respect, I mean, it isn't going to meet a planting schedule now till next winter, so you have got a reasonable amount of time to do due diligence with whoever might fall into that space, I guess. I have a second question though, and I note in the report on page 234 that MPI would inspect the 2021 planting. Was any inspection undertaken of the 2020 planting? Because generally where plantings are subsidised by the Crown, even if on private land, there's an expectation that there is some inspection to understand the amount of stock that have actually taken. So was any inspection of the 2020 planting done, do you know, please?
I can't confirm that. I would have to come back to you. Unless we've got Amy. Oh, sorry, I think we do have Amy on the line, so she may be able to respond directly.
Morena koutou. Through the chair, I'm sorry, I just missed that question. There was a switch over to get me into the meeting. Was that around last year's planting and how that's doing?
Yes, thank you. No, I'm reading page 234, which talks about totally reasonable inspection by MPI for the planting of this year. But was any inspection done of the 2020 year planting of winter of 2020? Did anyone inspect that to see what percentage of take there was, which is the general practice that we're familiar with out in pastoral farming, planting or whatever?
Through the chair, that area wasn't required to be inspected by MPI because it was not under the funding agreement with them. However, we did install our own monitoring plots in there, and when we checked them at 6 months post-planting, we were at around 95% survival of those plants. Now that we've gone through a full year of growth, we will be going back to check those monitoring plots within the next month or so and see where we're at with survival of those.
Thanks very much, through you, Chair. Thank you very much for that. And that's a really good survival rate for planting in hill country. And it would be really interesting if that could be reported when we have papers on the topic, because that is interesting information for not just ourselves, but for the wider public who are interested in what's going on up there. So thank you very much for that data.
All right, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. My question was just with regards to the, firstly, obviously 24 hectares or 12 currently to 200 plus is a huge step up. So yeah, I'm pleased to see that the recruitment teams are complete, and yeah, just note the incredible I guess jump in focus that will require. So yeah, pleased to see that the team numbers have increased. I think the question I had was around what in the long run council is doing in terms of linking into initiatives that are pretty much on the ground in some areas already. You probably will be familiar with the likes of Pure Advantage, who are looking at mixed species, long rotation, selective harvesting to make native trees able to sustain, I guess, the maintenance of the forest themselves, the likes of pest control, etc. Have we had any, I guess, approaches from organisations like that, or have we approached them? Is this something that any of our partners in this space are looking into? Yeah, that's my first question. I've just got one more.
What's the coin, ladies?
Through the chair, that will come through as part of our EII process that Michelle was just talking about. So we have had a couple of conversations, just a very initial early conversations to get an understanding of what's out there in terms of other potential commercial interests that could help in that way. And we will provide a full report back on all of those options that come through in that expression of interest process.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, particularly you may have been on that Recloaking the Whenua Zoom call last week, but if you were, I guess one thing I would point out is that there's a lot of enthusiasm in the community for some of these new initiatives, but they really lack, a lot of them, the capacity for trialling some of these initiatives. And we currently have something that probably fits that bill really, really well. And yeah, so just on the tail end of that, I've got a question around at what point we would be able, the test plots would enable us to determine the cost effectiveness of the planting that we're doing relative to reversion that's happening in plots that aren't planted. Do we have an idea of when we're visiting that question?
Through the chair, we don't have test plots set up for measuring regeneration and I guess in terms of our efforts that we need to put in for weed control and pest control. But that's definitely something that we can look at, and I think something we should be looking at.
Thank you.
Yeah, we support that. Thank you.
Right, so the recommendation is just noting the content of the report, and it was moved by Councillor Faulkner and seconded by Councillor Seymour. Nothing further. Those in favour? Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was two. Yeah. Councillor Ackwarder-Brown and seconded by Councillor Faulkner. All those in favour? Yes, carried. Thanks, Michelle and Amy. Now we're at page 235.
Morena tato. Hopefully Tom and Josh will be joining us. Josh did have to go out to the drilling site urgently this morning, so he may not be able to phone in, or he might manage it. Just to introduce this information report, I will take it as read, just to say it's an update on where we're at with the drilling at Tolaga. Drilling started up again last week after being stopped during COVID lockdown. And really, I just wanted to take this chance to recognise the great work that Josh and Lillian have been doing with the community out at Uawa and in Tolaga. Built some really strong relationships there, which are going to stand us in great stead with some of our future freshwater planning and catchment planning work. So now we'll take questions unless you wanted to add anything, Tom. Okay.
Good morning, Joe. Thank you very much for this report. I get excited when I see things about alternate freshwater sources, as you know. My question is, and I hesitate to put it to you at this stage because we don't have enough information to even discuss our situation down here in the city. But does this sort of project, in your opinion, run the risk of being sidelined as a result of things like Three Waters reform and the like, because this is going to become front and centre when it comes to supplying fresh water to our ratepayers?
So Thank you, Councillor Faulkner. You always ask the best questions. So from my perspective, and from what I understand of the Three Waters reform, planning for freshwater and, if you like, management of the freshwater resource still sits firmly with councils. So I don't think this work will be sidelined. I think it's still very important that we continue with it. You will have heard Minister Parker say, for example, that councils need to continue with their freshwater planning programs to meet the national policy statement for freshwater requirements, which is that we do our freshwater planning by 2024, or at least the first stage of it. So at this stage, no, but we do have RM reform also underway at the same time, and local government reform. So it is a bit of watch this space.
Thank you. Is that, yeah, Councillor Robinson, thank you.
Thanks. Joe, paragraph 15 of the report on page 238 refers to the memorandum of understanding, and it sets out in some detail the scope of the memorandum, which is really extensive and also ongoing. And also I note it talks about TAHMK to maintain rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga over its resources in the context of this project. The MOU hasn't been put before us, I don't believe, in a draft form, and it's certainly not attached to this, and it is proposed to be signed off next week. I'm uncomfortable with that, and I would like us to see that MOU, because that is a significant, in my view, quasi-legal document or relationship. And I'd like us to have some more information about that, please, particularly if it's purporting to do what it says at paragraph 15. I don't know if it's going to get signed off under level 2, but yeah, that's my concerns.
So through you, Chair, the MOU is very much pitched at an operational level. So it's about how we as staff work with the kaitiaki on the ground. I would ask Josh to maybe do a brief overview of the detail of the MOU, and it has been reviewed by our legal team as well, just in case there were any red flags, because we didn't want to be signing ourselves up to anything that was not appropriate. Josh, do you have anything to add? If you can join us from, Josh is actually at the drilling site.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you see me?
Yeah, see you and hear you.
Okay, hi, kia ora. Thank you. Yes, and through the chair, in regards to the MOU, date has been set for the 25th of September, which falls on a Saturday. The MOU is at an operational level on the ground. So with the drilling project, we work with Mana Kaitiaki, which is obviously it's in the report. It's a representative of each marae in Hawati. It reflects our relationship, our working relationship, and a pathway forward for future projects and catchment planning for the Uawa catchment. So it's really at that operational level with council staff, and the intention of the MOU is for it to be a living document, so we can make changes and let it grow naturally, and also hopefully with the relationship growing as well.
Thanks, Joshua.
Supplementary. We know that in Tairāwhiti there are various competing positions in relation to Te Wai. I want to make sure that whatever position the council is seen to be taking through the staff through this MOU is consistent with our messaging, or not inconsistent, rather with other positions we're taking, particularly with other iwi or hapu. So I'm really concerned that this could be a precedent setting. It's said to be a living document, which means it is anticipated going beyond perhaps the operational scope of this project, which has a limited life. And I just want to make sure that we're not setting something in concrete which is going to bite us later on, or that we're not covering off things we should be covering. And we haven't seen it at this table, and I'm just concerned about that.
Through the chair, if I may, so we can circulate the MOU to you, but it is, as the team was saying, it is a very operational one of nature. If it was to be anything around the governance, you would then have a hui with Te Aitanga Hawati, which you have not. So this has been a direct engagement around with the staff on the ground, with the team that are also supporting them up there. In the absence previously, we didn't have anything in place when we were going into the community to undertake the drilling. And I think Councillor Seymour was part of that. We had it was quite tense in terms of that, and so the initiative was, well, if we're going to be operational procedures in Hawati, then this is what it would look like. But we can circulate the MOU to alleviate any issues.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree. It would be good if we did see the MOU and it could have been appended to the paper. I just want to make it really clear that the community, the hapu of each of those maraes have been heavily involved, and just in reference to an earlier comment, it isn't about the commercial exploitation of water, and council officers, and thank you all on the screen, have been really particular about making that clear to the community that it was not about commercial exploitation. It was about council understanding what the aquifer might have been beneath the flats around Uawa. So thank you to the team for this report, and I think it'd be really helpful if we just had that MOU for information, because it is, albeit it's operational, it's still precedent setting, and there will be other opportunities where this will be, where an MOU will be necessary. I wasn't able to attend the last hui, which was on a Sunday when I was out of town, so I'm not familiar with what happened at the very last hui, but there have been 4 with the wider community in Uawa, and the team have worked really hard to build a relationship and to take away any concern that there might have been about exploitation, because there was a concern, and generally from those who weren't able to be at the hui, because at any hui that was made really clear it wasn't about exploitation. So thank you to the team who have worked really hard to make sure that that was a message the community understood. It was about our understanding the science beneath the Uawa flats, if you like, and the wider Tolaga Bay area, but not about the commercial exploitation. So thanks for that, and thanks if we could see the MOU. We still don't have a time for the 25th, which was to be advised. I know 1 or 2 of us who were invited, so you can let me know privately about that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Seymour. Councillor Wharehinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, Councillor Seymour spoke to my point. I hear the staff in regards to that the MOU is operational, but it does help allay councillors' concerns if those things are appended to the papers that we get here. It's good to hear that will be emailed out to us. Is that correct? Thank you. And the second comment that I wanted to make was to our staff. Really great report. Very good in terms of future thinking about where we're going regionally around water. Also, special acknowledgement to you there, Josh, sitting out on site. You're doing our first name proud, mate. So well done. Like all Josh is working hard. Hey, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wharehinga. Councillor Worsnop.
Thank you. My questions are a little bit more, I guess, to the practical aspects, just noting that point 2 on page 242 notes that no potable water has been found from the existing boreholes, and we're intending to drill another 2. Given that we've found nothing, or at least nothing usable, is another 2 boreholes sufficient, in your opinion? And just the second question I had was, given that the reasoning behind us needing to drill these holes is to ascertain the picture, as per our statutory responsibilities, does that rationale also apply to us then needing, following this, to look to the likes of the Waipu and maybe Wharaturu Tikaraka, or the scope of our investigations at this point confined to Uawa? Thank you. 2 questions there.
I think Tom is probably best to answer the question about the bore locations and also our future programs in terms of investigations.
Morning, Tato. Yes, very good question for the chair. Very good question, Councillor Worsnop. We have hydrogeologist who's worked with us, so who's provided guidance. So once the bore drilling goes on, we will assess the information that we find through, for example, the different geology and also that type of water we're finding. We take the water and we carry out an analysis from it, and then sit down as a sort of working group with the community and sit down and work out what the next step is. And the recommendation from the hydrogeologist for that case is this is a good representation of that aquifer. So if you drill another bore in the same location, all you're going to do is find exactly the same. So we have done a total of 4 bores drilled in the first tranche, as stated in the report, of which 2 were converted into monitoring bores for our purpose because there was some form of water found there. The other 2 were decommissioned. It's basically a cost-saving mechanism. You drill the first sort of rough and ready, as they say, at bore. If there's a sign that it's going to be producing some water and good scientific analysis, then we spend the effort and the time to drill it into a permanent monitoring bore. Otherwise, we move on with discussions with that sort of group and led by the hydrogeologist to move on to the site. So we've done those 4 and we found that got good representation from that. Once we'd finished that first period, we then stopped, looked at the whole catchment, and went on sort of a few site visits with the hydrogeologist and identified these 5 other areas where it's worthwhile drilling for further information. And the really exciting thing from my point of view from this perspective is working with the local community with sort of the Mataranga Māori aspect and finding out gleans of information through that and sharing our information with the local knowledge, for example, where there's springs, and just looking up on the hills surrounding Tolaga to say, right, there's a dark patch up there, that's therefore a spring must be up there, and then using the hydrogeologist's years of experience to infer, right, if we carry on down that line, if we bore here, drill the bore here, we're likely to find out some useful information. So it's a whole part of a package of which the bore is one thing. Does that answer your question, Councillor Walsall?
Yeah, it kind of does. So the 2 additional, you consider them valuable enough to give you a comprehensive enough picture to draw some conclusions?
Yes. So we on the second tranche of drilling, which is where Josh is currently, we have another 5 sites, and we will then, once this project is finished, we will evaluate the whole picture and be able to say what the aquifers in the pitch in the whole catchments look like. And then we will make a decision then whether there's any need to come back in the future to drill further. However, our feeling is that is not, that we should provide sufficient information from that. But until we've continued this second period of drilling, we will obviously, once we've completed that second period of drilling, we will provide you with another report with the findings. And from that, we'll be able to do an assessment.
And just into the future for the other?
Yes. So in the LTP, we have funding from financial year 22-23 for another just over 400,000 worth of bore drilling. So basically, once we finish the Tolaga drilling, we're going to take our lessons learned from this, and then we have until the sort of May, June next year to decide where we go next, but certainly we'll be further up the coast, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Arkwright-Brown.
Thank you. So I thought Councillor Wasnot was going to ask my question, part of what she asked, but it's just the Ma Aquifer, we had quite a considerable investment into that space. So is this a continuance in a new space, but not as invested? Because, you know, that was quite significant. And so some of us sat in those subcommittee spaces, and of course that's now wrapped up. So I just wondered where Ma, and I was thinking along the lines of Councillor Walsall as to other parts of region that we will look into for freshwater takes, because it's part of our job as council. But the Ma Aquifer role, has that helped with this project at all?
So through you, Chair, I'll answer part of the question. So in terms of, I guess, our wider water security and resilience programme, we do have a paper prepared for council that will either be coming to you at the council meeting on the 30th or next month at Sustainable Tairāwhiti, depending on agenda sizes. And that will help paint the picture of how both the work done on MAR, the current work being done at Tolaga, and all our other freshwater management, planning, monitoring work all fits together. So I think that might help answer your question rather than me talking to you now for about 20 minutes.
All right, Councillor Seymour. Oh. Thank you. So it's moved by councillor Seymour, second by councillor Arkwright Brown. Nothing further. All those in favour? Against? Carried. That's the open part of the meeting. We do have excluded business, which is just the moving of the minutes. So I move to go into public excluded, second by councillor Burdette. Minutes.